Before I start, I just want to say massive respect to everyone for attending the event today. I think this is a fantastic community summit. I think it's unbelievable community. I think you've already won. It's easy to go to work and think, okay, today I'll just go to work, but it's an effort to come out and invest in yourself and the community. So massive respect and kudos for attending the event today. My name's David Anderson, and I want to talk about creating momentum with the Value Flywheel Effect. So I kind of want to start off. I've been using this slide for probably about, I'd say probably 10 years. I've spent a lot of time kind of modernizing and really advocating for serverless first, which I'll talk about. And I always get asked, why serverless? And I've been using the phrase, it's the wrong question to ask. It's not why should I do serverless, it's when do I start modernizing? Not if, when. I've been using this kind of analogy that the great wave will come and you'll realize that's passed you by. And we're probably in the middle of a wave now with all this kind of AI stuff that's happening. And the thing about waves is there's not just one, they keep coming. If you look at this picture of the great wave, one has just passed and there'll be one behind it. So the thing is, it's like a non-stop process. Once you start this idea of modernization and really accelerating on what AWS has to offer, it never slows down. So I think that's the kind of space that we're in, and we have to and that's why I think it's so important at this event. You're investing in yourself for almost continuous learning. So for myself, I spent a lot of time with Liberty Mutual, and with my two co-authors here, Mark and Mike, we drove a massive modernization. Liberty Mutual, like one of the Fortune 100 insurance companies. And I wrote this book about 3 years ago called The Value Flywheel Effect. It was published with IT Revolution and Gene Kim. And it's really, I would describe as a handbook for how to kind of perform cloud modernization. And it's very lucky to have a foreword written by Adrian Cockcroft and Simon Wardley. Adrian Cockcroft was basically the person who brought Netflix into the cloud, and Simon Wardley is a fantastic researcher from the south of England, but I'll talk more about him in a second. And it's been fantastic. The point of writing the book was to have the conversation about modernization, which I think is fascinating. The Value Flywheel itself, I would really describe it, it's quite simple. If you're working in technology, it's not the realm of the IT department. You should join your business and technology strategies as one. It's the same thing. They're not two different things. So this is what I kind of discovered through over 10 years of doing this. And I think about these 4 phases. The first phase is clarity of purpose. You need to be really clear on what you're doing and why. It's to start with why. The second is the environment. You need to have a really good environment for success within your team and your organization. The third is next best action. You want a really best of breed technology stack to make sure your engineers can build well. And fourth, you need strong standards for long-term value, which for me is the well-architected framework. And there's a reason why it's a flywheel, because once you start putting these things in place, it never stops. And I personally use Wardley mapping to create that bit of perspective, which I'll talk about in a second. So I just want to, before I get into it, I just want to acknowledge the amount of uncertainty. Like as engineers, uncertainty is what we deal with, but I think it's never been this uncertain. I've been writing software probably since the 80s, since I was small. There's never been this much change. It's exciting, but it's also quite daunting. But I think we need to embrace that. So I'd like to frame the talk with a Wardley map. So maybe a quick question. Is anyone familiar with Wardley mapping? A couple? That's good. Okay, well I'll explain the kind of what this is. I've been probably using this for about 10 years now, or maybe about 8 years, and I think it's a superpower. So really the map is, there's an anchor at the top of the map, which is your key sort of user or persona who the map is kind of based on. In this regard, it's a CTO, but could be like a tech lead. The vertical axis is like a value chain. So the things at the top are needed. So the CTO needs something at the top. As you go lower down, things become more invisible. It's like it depends on. So things at the top are more visible, at the bottom are less visible. But what's really important is the horizontal axis, the evolutionary axis, and there's 4 phases, right? So first there's genesis. Things that are in genesis are brand new. They're like magic. It's like, wow, that's incredible. I never knew that. How does that even work? Things will then evolve to custom, where it's like, I think I know how to build it, I think I get it, but I'm not quite sure. When things evolve into product, it's like there's demand, there's customer demand, people want this thing, and then when things move into commodity, it's the cost of doing business. And compute has evolved through this over the past few decades. Now compute is just, yeah, whatever, I'll grab an instance from somewhere, but everything evolves from left to right. There's a great site called learnworldlymapping.com where you can kind of see more of this, which I recommend. So I kind of want to frame a few topics based on this, this map. So we have a CTO who needs to drive change, right? That depends on goals. And let's just say, for sake of argument, the clarity of purpose is super clear. There's also an attitude within the teams, and there's a fear of the unknown. People aren't or can maybe afraid of change, aren't quite sure. And the little black mark there is an inertia point, where there's a piece of inertia around something that's blocking. So for me, to kind of evolve that attitude within the team, it's important to build psychological safety within the team. I think it's super important before you start into anything. And that maybe gets people from fear of the unknown into curiosity. And I think when you are building a system, you have to acknowledge that it's more than code. It's like socio-technical. You have to think about the code, the developers, the teams, the product managers, the operations, the users. There's a whole bunch of stuff, vendors, there's a whole bunch of things that participate in the system. I think as engineers, we need to acknowledge those things. And one thing I think is extremely important is that if you're in a leadership position, is that it's so important that you create the environment for success. That for me is if you are in a leadership position, you have to create that environment for success in the teams, which promotes learning. Thinking of psychological safety, I love this this diagram here by Mo Tomorrow, and it really talks. I think it's a really nice sort of explanation of psychological safety, if you think about it. So at the very bottom left here, you've got exclusion, and you've probably been through all these things in different teams. So in your exclusion, you're not part of the conversation. Something's been talked about elsewhere. You're not even in the room. You've been told secondhand a decision has been made. You weren't part of it. That's probably the worst scenario. The next is inclusion safety. You're potentially at the meeting, but you don't feel you can talk. You don't feel safe enough to share your opinion. It's better than being out, but you can't really use your voice. Next is that learner safety. Maybe as a team, you come up with a problem, and you might learn together. There's an acknowledgement that we don't understand what this thing is, we need to learn, which again is getting better. Then you come to contributor. I now feel okay that I can suggest something. While we're learning, I can make a suggestion. They say, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And then finally, where I think you're really safe is that challenge. Now, I really love the concept of challenge. Many of my American colleagues say, I don't think you know what that means. And I think I'm very clear. I want to be in a position that if my boss or my peer has an idea, I want to challenge that idea respectfully. So I think a real measure of psychological safety, if anyone, the technical lead, has an idea, I feel confident enough that I can challenge that idea, and in a respectful manner, of course. So for me, having that environment in a team is so important to how we learn. One thing that I think is incredibly important, and I see this working with lots of teams, is the idea, I'd like to talk about some inertia points, is the idea of knowledge versus expertise. And something that I see an awful lot in teams. You potentially have a team manager, an engineering manager, who maybe hasn't written a line of code in 10 years, and they start telling the team what to do. Whereas here today, I think what we're doing is building expertise. There's a thing in technology where you have to stay kind of on the sharp end. Once you kind of sit back, that expertise turns into knowledge, which turns steel. So I think in a team with psychological safety, you have to let the experts, the engineers, make the decisions. I see something that, especially as we're in this current environment, you can see like managers from yesteryear like sharing old ideas, and I think, again, we're demonstrating that today being at this event. I think we have to be very deliberate about building our expertise. And one thing as well I think about when you are working in a company, I hate the term, we'll ask the business. If I'm working in a company and I have a badge, I'm part of the company. I have as an employee, I have the agency to challenge any ideas, to come up with new thoughts, and drive things forward that I think will benefit. I really have a problem with people saying, we're in IT, we don't make the decisions, we'll just do what we're told. For me, that's not a good environment to learn and to modernize. So let's say, for example, we introduce psychological safety in the team. We now want to think about how do we build some important technology sort of ideas. So for me, you want to have technology with impact, right? You kind of want to think about there's a couple of things, and I want to talk about each of these. Platform engineering, a system model, and engineering excellence. There's three things that you could recognize that you want to, with maybe a serverless technology strategy, you could evolve from left to right. So let's talk about platform engineering first. There's a massive, you see, Werner Vogels has been talking about EDA and event-driven for the past few years in reInvent, and I think it's brilliant. I've been a fan of EDA for a long time. And that idea of single-purpose functions, well-defined contracts and isolation boundaries, that idea of async communications between components. Multi-account, one thing I think is very cool in AWS is you can actually set up multi-accounts to have like a blast radius between bounded contexts. And distributed observability. This is something that was incredibly difficult. I tried to build a system like this about 15 years ago. It didn't end well. But now, with what AWS offer, it's now starting to become a lot more achievable to build these event-driven systems. So how do we make it easier to build systems? And I think something that's really important in platform engineering is how does that actually help us build event-driven systems? I like the idea of system constraints, right? When you're building a system, like I don't want my IDP to be saying, here's a scaffold to help you create an API. That's not difficult. I want actually constraints around what's the purpose. If I'm creating a component, what's the purpose of that component? What's the context of that component? Like how big a scope does it have or should it have? How does it fit with our business? And then the idea of decentralization. As we start to build our systems, we need to think about, this is really system thinking. And there's a nice Creative Commons from the System Innovation Network where they talk about these ideas of system thinking. And I really like the idea that these are coming together with technology. And you can really see this in event-driven systems. One brilliant example of this is Event Catalog by David Barney. David, who's here today and speaking later. I love this tool, and I've implemented it. I think it's brilliant. And it's a way to visualize and highlight what your system is doing. And if your system is a mess, yes, your catalog will be a mess. So I think we need to create those system constraints to map to your business and then actually visualize them. And for me, that probably I would say the gap in platform engineering is the fact that I'm not sure platform engineering is really looking after the event-driven systems more a traditional way. So I really like the fact that Event Catalog can help you explore a system with all your stakeholders, not just your engineers. I do think, as an inertia point for platform engineering, that DevOps has forgotten about the developer. It's a real shame, but you see the original intent of DevOps was to bring development and ops together. Now it's become a role. And I think that's completely incorrect. And I'll not give out a bit backstage, but I think backstage had a massive amount of potential as an IDP, but it's kind of become almost like a sysadmin thing. I think we need to think more about how do we help engineers build systems, not just create APIs with scaffolding. The next thing I want to talk about is system modeling. There's another kind of component of technology strategy. I love this quote's probably from about maybe 25 years ago as part of the original XP from Kent Beck. The system metaphor is a story that everyone, customers, programmers, and managers, can tell about how the system works. So often I see engineers building something and they can't explain what they're building to their stakeholders. That's absolutely criminal. If you think of all the things we use today, many of them are metaphors, like a shopping cart, library, agent, model, bus, gateway, even big ball of mud. We commonly use metaphors to describe things, like a mouse, So software is full of metaphors, and really what that is the idea of storytelling. You want to create a vision and share that with all your stakeholders and get alignment. It's kind of, I would say, more of a intrinsic way of getting alignment with all the people you're building for and with. And paralleled with that, I think, is the practice of marginal gains in that system. You've got your big kind of metaphor, and then you've got your kind of small individual like quality control. One thing that I love is I've been using the well-architected framework now for many years as a continuous improvement mechanism. And we've actually shortened this to SCORP, and SCORP being an acronym for security, cost, operational excellence, reliability, and performance. And one thing that I kind of would do with teams is every sprint, maybe every second sprint, I'd like the teams to capture metrics on these 5 pillars, and we can get some time to discuss that. It's almost like a continuous improvement practice. And I've run this with hundreds of teams. It's a fantastic approach to bring that kind of level of detail into how the team build the system. We actually have a practice where when we are doing SCORP with teams, we ask them to build a low fidelity dashboard, usually on a wiki, and just list a bunch of performance stats, and we'll create some time to actually, usually an architect or myself with the team will sit and discuss, like, what are the performance times over the past month, and what do we see going up, what do we see going down, what improvements. And even sometimes we'll have several teams together actually discussing improvements. So that idea of having a very standard opinion of what good looks like. So when you bring that together, I think for system modeling, right, there's almost the idea, if you think of a garden as a metaphor, right? You have to plan your garden. You have to have your big vision, maybe several years' time, this is what I want this to look like. You'll plant in according to that plan, but you also have to prune. You have to actually work and figure out. It's almost like the large system metaphor of the garden and the small kind of continuous improvement of like weeding and clipping and kind of that low-level maintenance. And to actually enjoy something like a large system, you have to have that big vision, that big metaphor, and that small practice of continuous improvement. And I think you have to be ambitious as we build systems. So then for engineering excellence. So this is an old slide. Like I think this is brilliant. We have to think of serverless not as a service, but more of an operational construct. And I love this kind of spectrum. And again, this is from a few years ago, so there's a few services missing. I like the way on the left of this kind of rainbow, you've got kind of on-prem things, that a huge amount of operational work is required. On the right, you have things like step functions, S3, Dynamo, Lambda, where there's less operational. And the whole thing about serverless first, which again, continually work with people, is it's a spectrum. Start on the right and kind of fall back as you go. It's absolutely a mindset. And when you reduce that operational burden, you can then do faster innovations and try more things. And I think it's amazing how many teams I've worked with that don't quite see this. They'll compare technologies, but don't see the bigger picture of how do we move really quickly with quality. One of the things that I'd often say to teams is, as we're building kind of components around the context, let's start with a constrained number of services. So we'll run our compute on Lambda, we'll run our data on Dynamo, we'll use step function and event bridge, a gateway, and then we'll architect it. So that's reducing cognitive load. And that helps us reduce operational overhead. We'll add in other services as needed. And I think it's really important to set those constraints so we can focus on the problem and then have a high level of engineering excellence. I'm continually sort of working with people to say serverless is not Lambda. Again, it is an operational construct, and it's really important that we need to think differently. And it's really how you think about the cloud in general. And I don't think we're there yet as people understanding some of these concepts. So, I have to talk about AI. I can't not talk about it. So apologies. So let's say in our Wordly map, our CTO wants to drive change. They've created the right environment in the team, that environment of curiosity. They've had a good technology strategy with impact. They've matured some of these things around platform engineering, system model engineering excellence. Then they say, what's next? Every time you kind of evolve a capability, it opens up a new capability. So let's say, for sake of argument, they want to leverage AI, right? Is it an assistant with architecture or code? Who knows? What you'll often see is someone will create some flashy AI demo. They'll grab something like Lovable and say, look, I've created our application in 15 minutes. Isn't this brilliant? And kind of Genesis is where ideas go to die. So often things will happen in Genesis, it's great, and then they'll kind of die. So one of the things I'm seeing a lot of kind of, I'd say, dealing with a lot is these flashy AI demos that have no real body behind them. Where I think it's more interesting, and sometimes the POC actually just opens up some space for this kind of idea of the AI native development, which I do think is interesting. But if you do leverage AI, I think you have to think about how we develop slightly differently, and there is a dependency on new agents. There's new agents coming all the time, and it's really interesting to see how these evolve. But the hidden dependency there is shared context. And you'll see there, I've put shared context as a dependency for both AI native development and technology with impact. And I want you to keep that in mind, that idea of shared context. Go back to this idea of knowledge versus expertise. It's one thing, I don't know about you, but it's driving me absolutely crazy. LinkedIn is full of experts predicting that AI will generate all the code. And it's not healthy. It's not healthy by any means. I think AI is interesting, but the hype cycle has just, the pendulum swing has just gone far too much the other way. And again, it's that idea of people maybe with knowledge from 10 years ago who see a demo, who think, brilliant, AI will speed everything up. And the thing that people are completely missing about this is that the code is a liability. It's the system is the asset. The problem was never typing in the code. It never has been for decades. It's how do we build a system? So I think that's such an important concept to think about and consider about, you know, as we have this full cycle, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And this is an idea that I've been talking with for many years with my teams. It's the idea that, and for me, this is almost the perfect explanation of that serverless mindset. It's not about writing code. Every line of code you write, you have to write it, test it, secure it, deploy it, and maintain it. The cost is huge. I do think that with what's happened in AI over the past couple of years, that idea of strategic thinking with AI in the cloud has just become exponential. It's one of the reasons why I'm finding a lot of value in Wordly mapping, because you can sit and think about capabilities and say, how is this going to evolve over the next 2 or 3 years? What happens if AI comes into this kind of space? What's the potential impact? And you can actually predict how things will happen. One example is I had a team 6 months ago who wanted to write a bunch of agents and wanted to write their own agent runtime. And I was like, hang on a second, it's only a matter of time before AWS release an agent runtime. And lo and behold, in July, Bedrock Agent Core came out. We were able to jump on that straight away. Again, you can almost tell when something's happening by predicting that. It is a game of chess. You have to think 3 or 4 moves ahead. Where will things go? One thing I've been super impressed by is AWS Kiro, the AI DLC. And there's a really nice white paper by this guy, Raja SP. That's the name of it there, AI-driven development lifecycle method definition. It's a nice white paper, the PDFs, if you just Google it. Just get this nice picture, and I really love the way the return of specification-driven development. It's like we tried this 15 years ago, we're going again. And I like the way the Kiro team have laid this out around the intent, construction, and operation. And you can see that idea of, you know, specifying what you want to build, be it a PRFAQ in stories, breaking that down into domains with our kind of domain-driven design and thinking about how does that break out, and then looking at that as the deployable units or almost like new primitives. I think it's a really nice way of structuring this AI native development. The problem is this bit. The first time we tried executable specifications and BDD, we thought, well, at the time the business analysts will write the specifications, and then we realized that they couldn't because they don't really know the system. So I can see the same thing happening now, is that engineers, it's not about the code, it's about the fact that they have to write the specifications for the intents. So you're going to see more engineers writing user stories, peer FAQs. It's really interesting because there are some excellent product managers who will be able to write these specifications, but in my experience, there's not as many as there should be. So I do think it's exciting time for this method of development, but again, The problem is always the same. What do we build? What is that clarity of purpose? And I do think I like this sketch from Dexter Harty. It's around kind of 12-factor agents. Now, of course, the original 12-factor app was by Heroku, maybe 15 years ago. I think it's got maybe 1,000 stars on GitHub. This came out 2 months ago, and it's got 15,000 stars. It just shows you the hype. But we get very excited about prompt engineering, thinking it's a new thing. But really what wraps all this is the idea of context engineering. And I think that's genuinely interesting. It's not that different from information architecture, which again has been around for a long time. But we now need to think about the context, and it's really going back to domain-driven design and thinking in systems. So I do like the fact that we're kind of moving away from prompts into the larger element of context engineering. So then for our Wordly map, the shared context here actually hasn't really changed when you think about it. We still have that shared context. The difference with AI native development is we now have to be very deliberate about writing it down. We always had shared context as we had systems, but now we need to write it down because we're actually going to use it and document it. So I think this is a really interesting development. It's, again, I think there's a foundation there that hasn't really changed, but there's almost like an extra avenue. I would say in this map, that main line there of a CTO driving change, leveraging AI, go back to the technical strategy, that really is the path. I think some of the stuff on the left is more of a distraction. So, kind of coming to the closing. I think there's 4 things that I think are really important. I think for psychological safety, I would give yourself permission, gift yourself a good environment with psychological safety. I wouldn't, in this time of uncertainty, don't accept a poor team. Don't sit in a team where you're not included or you're not part of the, we all need to be in a learning journey in teams because things are moving. So gift yourself that permission to demand psychological safety in your team. For platform engineering, I don't want a scaffold to create an API. That's not the hard part. I want help building event-driven systems. So challenge your platform engineering team to actually support the engineers better. Bring in something like Event Catalog. Use like better governance tools. It's not about having a nice scaffold. That's kind of losing the point of it. The platform engineering needs to evolve with the development teams. The context has never been more important. It's really important that we think about context, we communicate it, we talk about systems, and we write down that context. And that's not just for engineers. It's for engineering managers, for product managers, for everyone. That shared context is incredibly important. It's going to get even more important. And then finally, think ahead and offload work to the cloud, to AWS. It's like that's what they're there for. So offload as much as you can to AWS and build well, focus on your problem. And to be honest, whether you do use AI or not, I think these foundations are absolutely rock solid and they're not going away anywhere. I do think in this time of uncertainty, I would embrace that uncertainty. But don't back down. I wouldn't be thinking, oh, AI will write the code, I'll go do something else. It's a time for engineers to really step up and start putting strong foundations in place because those foundations haven't really changed. So that's kind of the 4 phases of the flywheel. I'd say clarity of purpose, creating a good environment, getting the right technology, and having strong standards. So that is that kind of join of business and technology strategies. And again, Wordly Map can help you look ahead. So that's me. I would say, again, repeat myself, the serverless mindset drives modernization. We have a podcast, myself and the 2 lads, where we talk nonsense. And that's the book. I'll be around all day, so I'm very happy to chat to people. And I think, again, thank you for attending the event. I think it's brilliant. And thank you very much.